This story talks about a man who mocked his wife's body after childbirth, then he threw her out, only to face the shocking consequences of losing her. For 12 months, Emeka gave Aisha diamonds and devotion. On the 13th, he mislaid both in a joke. Morning came to their flat near Woos Market like a soft promise. Aisha woke to the familiar rhythm, the kettle's thin whistle, the careful creak of Emeka's shoes on the veranda tiles, the warm cup he always placed beside her palm before the day pulled them both away. He would press his lips to her brow in a way that claimed the small kingdom of her face and call her his queen while she pretended embarrassment, and he teased a laugh from her. In those first months, his attention was a currency that paid for everything. Flowers left at the foot of the bed, street food deliveries at midnight, a camera for the one afternoon they spent at the National Mosque taking photographs of the light. Abuja blossomed for them in bright, cheap ways, the shouted colors of market stalls, the smell of roasted plantain, the drip of cold air conditioning against sticky summer skin. Love, they agreed, was ordinary and therefore eternal. They fell in love the way people fall into verandas. Slowly, then all at once. Emeka courted her with a dozen small reverences. Patience when she spoke, an ear for her jokes, the exact brand of soap she liked. A year condensed into treasures. A wristwatch for her birthday, a borrowed suit he wore only once at an engagement, a promise he sealed with the village pastor's blessing. Everyone in their compound had the romance tucked into their pockets like a private radio program. Aisha kept replaying the same songs in her head. Pregnancy arrived like a hymn. When the sun came. A small, furious thing named Ifeanyi. The flat changed its meaning. A cradle replaced the balcony's potted herbs, and laughter now came in the clipped, sleep-starved rhythms of a house learning a new language. Nights were punctured by the baby's wail and the bright, ridiculous tenderness of feeding. Emeka was radiant at the hospital, an anxious god who washed his hands like prayer and vowed, in a voice that cracked, that nothing would ever dim the way he saw her. For a while, he kept that promise as if it were a garment he had stitched with his own hands. But fairy tales, even the good ones, keep their cracks. The first fissure was so small it might have been ignored. A joke at a friend's barbecue, meant to be light, meant as a laugh that included everyone. They stood under a patched tarpaulin near the food stall, the air heavy with smoke and the sweet clatter of plates. Emeka lifted his beer to toast a story and with half the compound listening, said, "Aisha must be careful. Motherhood has made her generous with the buffet." Laughter rippled. Some smiled, others' titters held the comment upright like a congratulation. Aisha laughed too, because there was nothing else to do in public, because the crowd scripts you into a role and she did not know yet that she had been written into shame. The line between jest and barb thins in the hands of someone you trust. After that day, the jokes came in different flavors. They were smaller at first, a nudge about the way her blouse fit, an offhand word when she took longer over the mirror. Later, they bent public into a display. At a family dinner, Emeka mimicked a woman's clumsy attempt at buttoning a dress and everyone laughed at the punchline. Aisha felt the blood retreat from her face like a tide, leaving cold confidence on the shore. She smiled, measured, did the thing marriage taught her. Forgive and rewear the forgetting. Home, however, had new weights. Aisha held 1,000 little lives at once. The baby's soft head against her breast, the house's unending list of repairs, a woman's second shift job typing invoices on a neighbor's old laptop because they needed the money. She moved through tasks like a person trawling for pearls. Fingers tired, always touching something that mattered. At night, when the streetlights spilled a dull gold through the blinds, Emeka started coming home late. He would kiss Ifeanyi with a distracted tenderness and say he was tired from work, while his phone buzzed with a life she could not read. She tried to meet the bar he had quieted into existence. She walked early in the mornings when the estate was washed in a thin, clean light. She tasted food differently. She chastised the mirror with a private vow to return to the pre-baby body as if it were a lost thing she could fetch. She lost weight, then regained it. She joined a neighbor's dance class and learned to smile in new muscles. These were not for him alone. At first they were for Ifeanyi and the hospital bills. But the ache behind the effort came from a single place, the bruise of a man's joke. Once, coming back from the market, a woman in the compound, a friend of her mother's, passed a remark with a gentle cruelty. "You know, my child, some men love the idea of a queen, not the queen herself." Aisha folded the sentence into her basket as she folded the plantains, but it pinched like a needle. She had been loved, the memory argued. She had been cherished. Was that history a lie or a stage set? That evening she found herself alone in the bathroom under the thin fanlight, the baby sleeping in the other room to the rhythm of a radio's soft gospel. She undid her hair, the braid falling like a modest curtain, and turned to the mirror. There she met the woman who had been ravished by life and made new in its hands. Softer at the edges, lines like tributaries beneath her eyes, shoulders that carried the baby's weight with more familiarity than any shawl. Her dress hung differently. Her skin had its own map. She searched her face for what the joke had claimed to steal and instead found the ledger of what she had given away. She laughed then, once, a small, brittle sound. The kind you give to neighbors when you do not want them to look inside. Later, with the house quiet and the city humming like a distant river, she counted the places laughter had nicked her heart. Words can break a home as surely as stones. And Amika had begun to throw them with frightening accuracy. At first, the cruelty disguised itself as habit, the way Abuja's traffic disguised itself as routine chaos. Amika's remarks slipped into conversations like dust that settled quietly but never left. He no longer called her queen. Now she was Mama Ifeanyi, spoken with a tone that carried more dismissal than affection. One Saturday afternoon, Aisha stood in the living room trying to dress for Emeka's cousin's naming ceremony. The Ankara gown she had worn before her pregnancy clung stubbornly around her waist. She turned sideways, adjusting the zip, smoothing the fabric with careful hands, hoping the mirror would agree with her optimism. Behind her, Emeka leaned against the doorframe, scrolling through his phone. "You're still wearing that?" he asked casually. Aisha glanced at him through the mirror. "It's one of my best gowns. You bought it for me." "That was before," he said, barely looking up. "Now it looks like it's fighting for survival." The words landed with surgical precision. She forced a small laugh, the polite reflex she had trained herself to perform. "It still looks fine," Emeka shrugged, "if you say so. Just don't embarrass me today." The sentence lingered in the room long after he walked away. It hung between the wardrobe and the mirror, heavy and uninvited. The ceremony pulsed with music and chatter, the compound decorated with bright fabrics and white plastic chairs. Women floated around in elegant wrappers, laughter rising and falling like drums warming for a festival. The aroma of jollof rice and fried turkey coated the air, thick and celebratory. Aisha carried Ifeanyi carefully, greeting relatives with her usual warmth. For a while, she almost forgot herself. The baby's laughter stitched her confidence together in fragile threads. Then Emeka joined a group of his friends near the drink stand. She overheard her name and turned slightly. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to listen. "Marriage changes people," one friend joked. Emeka chuckled. "My own changed completely. She used to be slim like those runway models. Now let's just say motherhood has been very generous to her." Laughter erupted, loud and careless. Another friend whistled. "So what are you feeding her?" "Yam and palm oil." Emeka raised his glass. "Everything. She eats like she's feeding two nations." The laughter doubled, echoing across the compound like a cruel anthem. Aisha felt her throat tighten. The music around her dulled, like someone had lowered the volume of the world. She held Ifeanyi closer, pressing her cheek against his soft head as if he were the only solid thing left. An elderly woman nearby noticed her stillness and gave her a sympathetic look. The kind that said, "I heard it too." That look broke something inside her. After that day, Emeka's absences grew longer and more deliberate. He began returning home after midnight, smelling faintly of cologne that was not his and laughter that was not hers. He stopped asking about Ifeanyi's milestones. When the baby learned to clap, Emeka watched without enthusiasm, nodding as if observing a stranger's child. Aisha tried to mend what she believed was tearing apart. She changed their meals, waking early to cook healthier dishes. She walked around the estate before sunrise, her sneakers kicking dust into pale golden light. She joined an online fitness class, squeezing exercise between feeding sessions and typing reports for her part-time bookkeeping job. Each improvement she offered like an olive branch, hoping Emeka would notice. He did, but not in the way she hoped. "You're trying too hard," he told her one evening, watching her measure rice portions carefully. "I just want us to be happy," she replied quietly. He laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Happiness isn't built in the kitchen or gym, Aisha. It starts with attraction. You lost that." The words scraped her bones. The truth arrived on a humid Thursday night. Emeka had left his phone on the dining table while he showered. It buzzed repeatedly, the screen lighting up like a stubborn secret demanding attention. Aisha tried to ignore it. She truly did. But when Ifeanyi's toy accidentally knocked the phone to the floor, the screen lit again. A message appeared. "Last night was perfect. When will I see you again?" Her breath stopped. Her hands trembled as she stared at the name. Amara. Aisha's world tilted slowly, like a cup slipping from a table edge. She didn't scroll. She didn't need to. The single message carried the weight of confirmation. When Emeka stepped out of the bathroom, towel draped over his shoulders, he found her standing in the center of the room, holding the phone like fragile evidence. "Who is Amara?" she asked softly. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Then Emeka exhaled sharply, irritation replacing guilt. "You were going through my phone. Answer me," she said, her voice trembling but steady. He snatched the phone from her hand. "Maybe if you spent less time spying and more time fixing yourself, we wouldn't be here." Her chest tightened. "You're cheating on me because I gave birth to our child. Don't twist it," he snapped. "I'm cheating because you stopped being the woman I married." The cruelty struck deeper than she expected. "I am still that woman," she whispered. "I just carried your son." Emeka's eyes hardened. "And lost yourself in the process." The argument escalated like a storm breaking over dry land. Voices rose. Accusations scattered like debris. "You've humiliated me everywhere," Aisha cried. "You humiliated yourself," he fired back. Ifeanyi began crying from the bedroom, his small wail cutting through the tension like a fragile siren. Aisha moved instinctively toward him, but Emeka blocked her path. "Enough," he said coldly. "I'm tired of this house feeling like a burden." Aisha stared at him, disbelief widening her eyes. "What are you saying?" Emeka grabbed her small travel bag and threw it toward her feet. "Leave." The word landed like thunder. "You don't mean that," she whispered. "I do. Go back to whoever will tolerate you. I need peace." Tears blurred her vision. "This is my home." "Not anymore." His voice was final. Dawn had barely stretched across the sky when Aisha found herself standing outside the building. Ifeanyi strapped to her chest, 2 bags beside her. The morning air carried the harsh smell of exhaust and early market fires. Neighbors peeked through curtains, their curiosity sharp and unhidden. She sank slowly onto the curb, clutching her child, her dignity unraveling in silent threads. Behind her, the door closed with a decisive click. Aisha stared ahead, numb, watching buses roar past like indifferent witnesses. Ifeanyi stirred and reached for her face, his tiny fingers brushing her cheek as if trying to wipe away the wetness there. A woman from the neighboring apartment approached cautiously, offering a bottle of water and an awkward sympathy that felt both kind and powerless. "Do you have somewhere to go?" she asked gently. Aisha opened her mouth, but no answer came. Then a familiar voice cut through the morning haze. "Aisha?" She turned. Zara stood at the gate, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm as she took in the scene. The bags, the child, the shattered woman she barely recognized. Without asking a single question, Zara walked forward and wrapped her arms around Aisha with fierce certainty. "You're not staying here," she said firmly. "You're coming with me." Aisha collapsed into her embrace, the first fragile crack in the dam of her grief finally breaking. She sat on the curb while Emeka's door remained locked behind her, and the street learned her name as a did not ask for permission before she became Aisha's roof, and roofs are honest things. They make the rain stop. The flattened kubwa was small, but it held the kind of warmth that could not be measured in square meters. The sitting room doubled as a bedroom, the curtains were mismatched, and the ceiling fan hummed with the tired persistence of something that refused to give up. To Aisha, it felt like sanctuary. Zara moved through the space with quiet authority, clearing a corner for Aisha's bags, spreading fresh sheets, and placing Ifeanyi gently on a foam mattress like he was a visiting prince. "You'll rest first," Zara said, tying her scarf tighter around her head. "Everything else can wait." Aisha tried to protest, but exhaustion swallowed her pride. She sank onto the mattress, her body folding into sleep like paper returning to its original crease. When she woke hours later, the sharp sting of humiliation had softened into a dull ache, manageable but heavy. Zara placed a bowl of pepper soup in front of her. "You're safe here," she said simply. Aisha stared at the steam rising from the bowl, her throat tightening. "I don't even know how my life became this." Zara sat opposite her, her gaze steady. "Your life didn't become this. Someone else's character revealed itself. That's not the same thing." The words settled into Aisha's chest, unfamiliar but comforting, like new furniture in a house she had not realized she owned. The first weeks blurred into a rhythm of survival. Zara worked long shifts at a small event planning company, but she still found time to help Aisha search for opportunities. She introduced her to a woman who ran a community tutoring center and needed help managing accounts and supervising children after school. The pay was modest. The hours were exhausting, but it was something. Aisha clung to the job like it was a fragile ladder leading out of darkness. She balanced Ifeanyi on her hip while reviewing receipts, answering parents' questions, and wiping chalk dust from her hands between tasks. The children at the center adored Ifeanyi, often taking turns singing to him while Aisha worked. One afternoon, as she balanced spreadsheets on the old office computer, she caught her reflection in the dark screen. Her face looked tired, but there was something new behind her eyes. Not joy, not yet, but determination. Zara introduced another change into Aisha's life with her usual practical boldness. "You're joining my morning walk group," she announced one evening while folding laundry. Aisha blinked. "Walk group?" "Yes." No arguments. "It's free therapy." The next morning, Aisha stood outside with a small group of women jogging slowly through the dusty estate roads. The air was cool, the sunrise painting the sky in thin ribbons of gold and lavender. At first, her legs protested. Her breath arrived in uneven bursts. But the women laughed easily, sharing gossip, recipes, and survival stories. One woman had rebuilt her life after losing her shop in a fire. Another was studying law while raising twins alone. Their resilience surrounded Aisha like invisible armor. Day by day, she grew stronger. The walks became light jogging. The jogging became energetic dance sessions organized by the group on weekends. She began choosing food deliberately, not as punishment, but as nourishment. Her body responded slowly, then eagerly, like soil remembering rain. Meanwhile, Amika's life began unraveling in quiet, humiliating chapters. The whispers about his affair grew louder within his office. Clients who once admired his confidence started questioning his professionalism. One afternoon, after missing an important meeting because of a night spent drinking, he received a formal warning from his supervisor. He laughed it off publicly. But alone in his car, the warning letter trembled in his hands. His friends, once enthusiastic companions, began avoiding his calls. The laughter that used to surround him faded, replaced by awkward silences and canceled plans. Still, pride clung stubbornly to him like a second skin. Back in Kubwa, progress did not arrive without setbacks. One rainy evening after a particularly long day, Aisha returned to Zara's flat and sat silently by the window while Ifeanyi slept beside her. The rain drummed against the metal roof with relentless urgency, echoing the storm inside her chest. "I miss who I used to be," she admitted quietly when Zara joined her. Zara handed her a cup of tea. "You don't miss her. You're mourning her." Aisha wiped her eyes. "What if I never become whole again?" Zara leaned closer, her voice gentle but firm. "Wholeness isn't going back. It's building forward." The sentence stayed with Aisha long after the rain stopped. Opportunities began to grow from the smallest seeds. The tutoring center expanded, and the owner trusted Aisha with more responsibilities. Parents admired her organization and calm demeanor. Soon, she was managing schedules, coordinating teachers, and mentoring young girls who admired her quiet strength. One of the parents, who worked at a local community radio station, noticed her dedication. "You should share your story," the woman suggested. "Women need to hear voices like yours." Aisha hesitated. The idea of speaking publicly felt terrifying. Her wounds still felt too raw, too personal. But Zara nudged her forward. "Your story isn't shame," Zara said. "It's survival." The radio station smelled faintly of dust and warm electronics. Aisha sat across from the host, her palms damp, her heart beating in uneven rhythms. The microphone stood between them like a patient witness. The host smiled warmly. "Today, we're speaking about motherhood, resilience, and rebuilding confidence. Aisha, tell us about your journey." For a moment, Aisha could not speak. Memories flickered. Laughter, humiliation, exile, healing. Then she began. She spoke about balancing motherhood and self-worth. About learning that beauty was not measured by another person's approval. About discovering strength in unexpected places. Friendship, work, and faith. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she continued. Each sentence felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that had once been stolen. When the interview ended, the host squeezed her hand. "You're going to inspire many women." Aisha stepped outside the station, sunlight brushing warmly against her face. She inhaled deeply, feeling something unfamiliar but powerful bloom inside her chest. That evening, she returned home to find Zara and Ifeanyi waiting with a small celebratory meal. Fried plantain, rice, and peppered chicken. Laughter filled the tiny flat, louder than the ceiling fan's stubborn hum. As they ate, Ifeanyi clapped excitedly, his laughter bright and contagious. Aisha watched him, her heart swelling with fierce pride. For the first time since she had been thrown out of her home, she allowed herself to imagine a future that did not include fear. Later that night, after Zara and Ifeanyi fell asleep, Aisha sat quietly with her phone, scrolling through messages from women who had listened to her radio interview. Their words overflowed with gratitude, admiration, and shared pain. She realized her story was no longer just hers. It had become a bridge. When the station called the next day to request another interview, Aisha answered with calm confidence. She spoke clearly, her voice steady, her smile unforced. When the microphone asked her name, she said it slowly, as if tasting a new currency. Remorse came late and ragged. Emeka knocked on doors he had once left open with a slam. By the time he decided to look for Aisha, his life had acquired an edge of ruin. The project he had led at work collapsed after a client discovered his absence during critical meetings. Calls went unanswered. Colleagues who had once toasted him offered clipped condolences and then, quietly, distance. The women he had spent nights beside no longer answered his texts. Pride, which had once smoothed his path, now kept him stumbling alone. He walked Abuja with the weight of a man learning how thin he'd been. He spent mornings at the traffic lights watching families pass, afternoons at cheap cafes nursing bitter coffee, and evenings poring over his calendar, trying to remember where he'd stored his better self. When he finally asked a mutual acquaintance where Aisha was, the answer came like a ledger entry: Kubwa, tutoring center, small shop near the market. He rehearsed apologies in his head until they sounded rehearsed. He imagined gestures that would fix everything. A returned gift, a public confession, a promise stitched with visible toil. The day he found her, Aisha was at the small community hall she now used for weekend classes. Children clustered around a chalkboard. Ifeanyi sat cross-legged at the front, clapping at a rhyme he had learned. The hall smelled of chalk dust and palm oil. Sunlight filtered through slatted windows and landed on a wall painted the hopeful blue of cheap paint. A woman was teaching the girls to braid, and Zara was arranging chairs with the stubborn efficiency of someone who had never owned the luxury of surrender. Emeka paused in the doorway like a man who had forgotten how to enter a life. He could have turned away. For a long, excruciating heartbeat, he almost did. Instead, he stepped inside. The air shifted. Conversations dipped, then resumed in awkward increments. Children glanced up. Ifeanyi's face, suddenly incandescent, broke into a confused grin when he saw his father. Aisha, who had been counting the minutes for the next lesson, met him with a calm practiced from months of rehearsing resilience. "Emeka," she said, as if reading the name from a list. He swallowed. His voice came out small. "Aisha." He looked around at the painted wall, the chalk, the little shoes lining the door. "I'm sorry. I am so sorry." He stepped closer, the apology open and raw. He took off his jacket the way a man might shed armor, and in its pocket they found the photograph he'd kept from their engagement. He placed it on a table between them like an offering. "I was a coward," he said. "I let fear and vanity hurt the woman I love. I lost my job. I lost everything. I am begging you. Please forgive me. Give me another chance. I will go to counseling. I'll do anything." The room thinned to the two of them. Zara's jaw tightened behind Aisha. A mother held her baby a little closer. Aisha felt the familiar old ache, the sting of public jokes, the night on the curb, the months of rebuilding. Memory is a clever thief. It shows you what you might have been, and then reveals the cost of the dream you never had. She closed her eyes. For a moment she listened to the beat of her own pulse, the small clap of Ifeanyi joining a class song, the creak of a chair. Emeka's confession was earnest. She could see the shame on his face, the raggedness of a man waking to consequence. Something inside her, softer and older than hurt, loosened. But forgiveness is not the same as reunion. "Aisha," Emeka said again, voice cracking, "I'll change. I will be the husband you deserve." She opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked, cataloging the man who had wounded her and the man who stood before her now. There was sorrow there, but sorrow did not undo the way he had thrown them out. It did not return the nights she'd slept with a child's blanket against her shoulder, globe-lit fear her only warmth. "You hurt me," she said, the words steady. "You humiliated me in public. You abandoned your son and me when we needed you most. I know," he whispered. "I know. Please." A hush fell. Children sang without understanding the adult's sorrow. Zara stepped forward, posture a shield. "What do you want, Emeka?" Zara asked, blunt and practical. "To come back," he said. "To our home. To my family. Please." Aisha inhaled slowly. She thought of the woman in the mirror, the radio interviews, the parents who now trusted her, the girls who braided their hair with reverent fingers. She thought of the nights she had walked, the small job promotions, the friendships that had kept her alive. She imagined returning to a life where her worth could be measured by another man's approval again. "No," she said. The word was quiet, irreversible. Emeka's face collapsed with a sound like a thing breaking. "But, Aisha, you can be forgiven," she said, surprising herself with the gentleness of it. "You can seek help. You can do the difficult, slow work of becoming someone who understands the cost of his actions. But I will not be the one to take you back. I will not let Ifeanyi grow up seeing me undone for the sake of a promise that was broken." He sank onto a chair as if the floor had become a betrayal. For a long time he looked at the photograph on the table and then at his son clapping to the rhyme. Regret arrived as a small, private tide. It could not build a home out of the ruins. I had hoped, he said finally, voice thin, that you would say yes, and we would fix it together. You hoped, she corrected gently, but you did not do the work when it mattered. Hope without change is a wish that ruins people. He bowed his head. No words came that could mend it. He rose slowly and left the hall, his shoulders narrower than when he had entered. Children's laughter swelled behind him, innocent, unaware of the complicated calculus of mercy and self-preservation. Months later, the community festival arrived with drums and bright cloth. Aisha sat in the shade of a painted tent, Ifeanyi on her lap, his cheeks flushed with the thrill of performance. He climbed the small stage to recite a poem he had learned about rivers and resilience. His voice was young but sure, and the crowd leaned in, delighting in the spiky joy of a child who belonged to a mother who had rebuilt him. In the press of people, Emeka lingered at the edge of the crowd, hands folded, hat in his palms. He watched his son from a distance, not as a man reclaiming territory but as someone learning the etiquette of remorse. Watch, witness, and accept the consequence. His eyes filled and then emptied with a man's sorrow. When the applause rose, Aisha looked toward the perimeter of the festival. Their eyes met for a breath. He tipped his head, a small, private bow. It was not a plea this time. It was admission. She smiled then, not the smile that once had been for him alone, but the kind that grew from peace. She turned back to her son. Later, walking home beneath the soft stretch of evening sky, Aisha took from her bag the apology Emeka had left at the hall, a letter folded and raw. She read it once more, feeling the faint echo of something that had almost been. Then she folded the paper into a small boat with hands that knew how to build and release. She set it on the gutter where the festival's last rain had pooled. It bobbed for a moment in the current, neat and fragile, then tipped and sank under the soft gray water. Aisha watched until the ripple faded. She did not feel triumph. She felt something steadier, a quiet that belonged to someone who had chosen herself and, in doing so, taught her son how to stand when the tide came in. What did you get to learn from this story? Kindly drop your thoughts and questions below. Do well to hit the subscribe button to see more emotional and exciting stories like this on Afro Tales by Siri.